Well, good afternoon. My name is James Sanderson, and I'm sure we've met before, but if we haven't, I'm the evangelism minister here at the Brown Street Church of Christ in Waxahachie, Texas. You are in the middle of a series that we're just starting. It's going to go for, I think, 13 lessons. In fact, that's the plan of God's love story, and we're trying to connect the dots. Again, a lot of people, they get bits and pieces of the Bible, but they don't get the whole package. They don't know how to put it all together. And so that's what we're going to try to do here. We're connecting the dots from Adam to Judah, okay, in these lessons right here. And we're specifically going to look at the story of Joseph and how he fits into the picture of Jesus. And this is what we're trying to do, is to show Jesus in the Old Testament. And when you start to see all the different things that point to Jesus in the Old Testament before you ever got here, it is amazing. It will strengthen your faith and to know that this Bible is the real deal. And that's what we're trying to accomplish in these lessons today. So let's get started. So we're connecting the dots. And as those dots get connected, there is somebody that's trying to figure this all out. Satan. And so we're going to use this cartoon of the coyote and the roadrunner, and he's always trying to catch the roadrunner, and he never can. Well, Satan can't ever catch Jesus. You can't stop this plan of God, okay? It's impossible, and it's amazing when you see it all pieced together. So we looked at the very first lesson. We looked at Genesis, and we seen that through the woman's seed, somebody is going to come and crush Satan's head. And this verse is pointing to the cross. So from woman's seed is going to come Jesus. And he's going to come and take this guy out. All right? Well, when Satan listens to this, as God tells him this, he's scratching his head going, how does this all work? How is this plan gonna be put together? Because he doesn't know. So we've seen that this plan started with Adam. It went to Seth, then down to Noah, from Noah over to his son Shem, and from Shem down to Abraham. Okay, and that's the seed line. He didn't go through Cain. Nope, not going through that line. He's over here. He's not going through Ham or Japheth. Nope, he's going this route. This is where that seed line from the woman is pointing to bring us Jesus. Then we see in this verse in chapter 12 when he's talking to Abraham, and he says, through you, Abraham, all nations are going to be blessed. Well, that's us. We're all going to be blessed through Abraham. Well, what is inside of Abraham? The seed line of Jesus. And so we followed from Abraham down to Sarah, right? Married Sarah, and then they had a son named Isaac. And then God says, look, I'm not going through Keturah. This is another wife that Abraham had after Sarah died. I'm not going through my maidservant, right? Hagar, right? Who had Ishmael. No, I'm not going that route. I'm going this route through Isaac. Isaac's going to marry Rebekah. Rebekah is going to have two sons, Jacob and Esau. Not going through Esau. No, going through Jacob. And then Jacob is going to pass down to Leah, and Leah to Judah, and then Judah from there on. Not going through Jacob's other wives. Nope. Went through Leah to Judah. So that's the seed line. And we've seen all these connections as we went through these lessons. Now this is lesson 4. If you haven't watched my other lessons, go back, start over again, and watch the first lessons on my YouTube channel, Saving Souls in the 21st Century. Just put that in, and you can see all these videos leading up to this video. So here's Satan trying to figure out, how is God working this plan? Who is he going through? Now we're going to start this week's lesson. Here's my question for you. Can other people's stories in the Bible connect to Jesus who are not in the seed line of Jesus? Well, let's see. So we're going to take a little turn here, and we're going to go over here to Jacob. And Jacob married 4 wives, right? Leah was his first wife, Rachel was his second wife, and then you have Zilpah and Bilhah. Okay? Let's look at what comes from Rachel. Rachel's going to have 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Let's look at the story of Joseph. Okay? Let's go backwards a little bit from last week's lesson, because we ended out with Judah. And let's skip over here to Joseph. Can Joseph have some connections to Jesus, even though he's not in the seed line? Well, let's see. So in the Old Testament, this is what you have. This is all before Jesus got here. You have no less than 330, and some people want to go as far as 450 direct prophecies about Jesus written in the Old Testament, all prophesied about him before he ever got here. They all connect to him, which just makes this Bible amazing. But there's something else that goes on. There is also these types, antitypes, analogies between people of the Bible, things of the Bible in the Old Testament, and Jesus. And there's said to be over 1,500 of those. That's what I want to look at today. I want to look at some of these. So here's what I want you to do. As you're going through, see how, this is what I told my class yesterday. How many types, antitypes, and analogies with Jesus can you find in the story of Joseph? See how many you can find. See how many connections. And my point is this. When you start seeing this, I don't care where you're at in the Bible. When you're in that Old Testament, it's going to point to who? Jesus, 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 through the seed line, but also through other people like Joseph. Next week, Lord willing, I'm going to start this lesson as soon as I get done with this on the story of Moses. See how many times Moses, who he's not in the seed line of Jesus, but we're going to look at Moses and see how many connections that he has to Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Everything is pointing to him to get us out of our problem. And that should strengthen your faith and tell you that the Bible that you hold is from God and it couldn't be from anybody else. All right, so let's get started with Joseph's story. Genesis chapter 37. We're going to see here the story of Joseph. We're going to see some jealousy between brothers. And then Joseph is going to be sold into slavery. Now, I know most of us know these stories, but I think we should go over this again. And in this story, we're not going to be able to hit all the verses, okay? So we're going to have to skip over. And if you want to go back and read and really get the details of this, please, I welcome you to do that. I hope that these lessons cause us to dig in our Bibles. Verse 2. These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph, being 17 years old. Now catch that. He's 17. Was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to their father. So what do you got here? You got a tattletale, don't you? Okay? Here's Joseph. And that's what the Bible does. It just tells about all the flaws of the people. This is what we got. Here's Joseph. He's tattling on his brothers. Well, you know how that goes, right? Verse 3, now Israel, this is Jacob. Remember, he has the name Israel now. He loved Joseph more than the other of his sons. All right, now we have another problem. Now we have favoritism. A father showing more love to one son than the others. That is also a problem. Now you start putting these problems together and see how they build. Because he was a son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. Well, he gets a robe of many colors, but the rest of them don't. But when his brothers saw that his father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. It's not good. There's Joseph. He gets his coat and the others don't. This is not a good story. Okay? Things are getting tough here. So, what do we have? Can you see the connection? Didn't Jesus's brothers hate him also? Not so much his physical brothers, but his brother Israel, right? The Jewish nation. Did they not hate him? Yes, they did. So there's your first connection, a type or an anti-type of Jesus. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. This hate is mounting here. He said to them, "Hear the dream I had, that I have dreamed. Behold, we were building binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed going to reign over us?" Now, do you see the story mounting here? Okay, this is getting worse by the minute. Are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So the hate is getting stronger and stronger. So there he is. He's having the dream, right? But he's not done. He's going to have another one. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, the 11 stars were bowing down to me." That's quite a dream, isn't it? They're kind of the same, but they're different. When he told this to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him. Now his father gets involved and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come and bow down ourselves to the ground before you?" That's what Jacob's asking. Seriously, son? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept all this in his mind. Is there another spot in the Bible that talks about somebody keeping all this in the person's mind? With Jesus? Yes, it was Mary, right? It was Mary. So I see a connection there. Now, will Jesus's brothers, will they bow down to him? Yes, they will. That's a prophecy in the book of Genesis. We saw it last week in last week's lesson. In the chapter 49, verse 8, read that. And he's talking, here's Jacob blessing his son. This is going to be way after the story, okay? When they get older, these sons get older. He's telling Judah that your brothers will bow down to you. Well, who's Judah? He's in the seed line of Jesus. Okay? So, will his brothers bow down? Will they bow down to Jesus? Yes, every knee shall bow, every mouth will confess that Jesus is Lord. So, I see a connection here. Okay? Even though Joseph is not in the seed line of Jesus, there's a connection. Verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their flocks near Shechem. And Israel, this is Jacob, said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. How about this one? Do you see a connection to Jesus? Didn't God the Father send Jesus to come to this earth to go check on his brothers, in a sense? Yes, yes. Jesus was sent to earth. So there's a connection here. There's an analogy here, okay? Verse 18, they saw him from afar, and before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. So they want to kill their brother, okay? He's coming. Here he is. He's going out to check on their brothers, right? Just like Jacob had sent him. And they're like, let's take him out. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben, this is one of the brothers, heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into the pit here in the wilderness. Do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of the hands to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of the robe, that of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Okay? See some connections here. I do. So there he is being thrown in the pit. And can you just imagine? Here you are. You're all alone in this pit, thrown in there by your brothers. They're all hating on you, right? You have no idea what's going to happen. You're there all night as those brothers sit and camp a little ways away. I can just imagine the screams, yelling for them, "Please let me out, please let me out." And they don't let them out. Jesus' brothers conspired on how to kill him, didn't they? Sure did. Those Pharisees got together and said, "Hey, we got to figure out a way to get rid of this guy." Yeah. So I see a connection there. Jesus was also stripped of his clothes as he hung on the cross. He hung there naked, right? I see a connection. I see a connection. Verse 25, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, now Judah's involved here, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. Let's do it. Okay? So Judah steps up and says, let's not do this, along with Reuben. Okay? Verse 28. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? Where can I turn now?" You just imagine Joseph here, walking away into slavery, not know where he's going. He is now leaving all family, 17 years old. What in the world is going on here? It's got to be pretty scary. Well, Jesus was also sold for some silver. He was sold for 30 pieces. So it's not exactly the same, but I see some correlations here, don't you? Yeah, I sure do. Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Jesus' robe was dipped in blood, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Yes. Um, Genesis chapter 49, going back to Judah, when he says his robes were dipped in blood. So there's a connection there to Jesus, because the seed line is in Judah, and it was really that whole prophecy there in chapter 49 verses 8 through 12 was pointing to Jesus. It just matches, doesn't it? It's amazing how this matches. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to confront him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph to Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. I tried to find a picture. I watched a movie a lot of years ago. I think it was back in the 80s on the story of Joseph. It was very well done. But I needed to try to get a picture of Jacob's pain of losing his son. Now remember, uh, he had 4 wives, but what wife did he love the most? It was Rachel, right? He loved Rachel. Well, Rachel was barren and barren and barren, didn't give him any sons, no sons, no sons, and then he started getting all these other wives, and they all gave him sons, and then at the very end, she finally has a son, and it's Joseph. So you can see that he loved Joseph more because he loved his wife more. Okay? And now that son that finally came from that wife is now dead. Now there was another son, Benjamin. But remember, Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. And so now Rachel's gone too. So the pain on this man's face has to be horrendous. It is cut deep, deep, deep into his heart. And this is the journey that he took. Started here in Hebron, went up to check on him, right? Shechem and then Dothan. And then he was sold in slavery. And where does he go? He goes to Egypt. Did anybody else go to Egypt? Jesus went to Egypt. Remember? Remember when he was 2 years old or less, living in Bethlehem, and the wise men came, and Herod inquired of them, and when they didn't return, because he wanted to know where this king was, he wanted all the babies 2 years old and younger killed. Okay, in the timing of when they came to him. So, what does the angel tell Mary and Joseph to do? Take Jesus, this young boy, and flee to Egypt. So Jesus went to Egypt. Here goes Joseph. He went to Egypt. I see a connection. Now, chapter 39. We're going to skip chapter 38. We're going to see Joseph at Potiphar's house. And then we're going to see Joseph confronted with sin. Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And the Lord was with Joseph. Well, I like that. I like that. Here he is, he's all alone. But God hasn't abandoned him. Maybe his brothers did, but not God. And he prospered. And he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, who's watching this? Potiphar. He's watching this. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he was put in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the house of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessings of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in his house and in his fields. Wow. Do you think Potiphar is seeing this? Do you think Potiphar is connecting this to God? Do you think God cares about Potiphar? He does. He does. He's showing himself here, and he's doing it through Joseph. Now I see a connection here. So he left. So he was. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." One day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. So she caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Good job, Joseph. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside and ran out of the house." So there he goes. He does what is right. Jesus was tempted in every way that we are, the book of Hebrews says, and yet he is without sin. Now, we know Joseph wasn't without sin, but in this instance, he does the right thing. He does the right thing. I think there's a connection here. When his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now, let me ask you a question. Who is angry here? Who is he angry with? Potiphar's angry. Who's he angry with? Is he angry with Joseph, or is he angry with his wife? Now, I always read this and I always thought, oh, he's angry with Joseph. But what's he going to do in a few minutes? We're going to see in a few minutes that he is going to put Joseph in charge of that prison. Well, if he's trying to sleep with his wife, he's not going to do that. I think he's mad at his wife. He knows what his wife's like. She's probably done this before, okay? Uh, and so he's mad because guess what? I'm losing all these blessings. He's not going to be in my household anymore, and I'm going to lose these blessings from God. Thank you very much, Mrs. Potiphar. Think about it. Think about that. Was Jesus not also falsely accused? Yes, he was. He certainly was. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was still with him. He showed him kindness, granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. That's Potiphar. And he was made responsible for all that was done there. That's Potiphar. Doesn't look like he's too mad at him, but he's got to uphold his wife's, her honor, okay, even though she's not due any. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord, here it is again, was with Joseph and gave him success at whatever he did. There you go. There you go. So even though he's in prison, God's still with him. And that's a good lesson for us, isn't it? Right? When we get down and out or wonder, where's God at? Where's he at? What's he doing? All these tough things that are going on. A spouse dies. A spouse leaves you. Uh, Loss of a job. Uh, all kinds of things. Health. Can you not still see through those stories where God was with you? Yeah. Blessing you? Yeah. We've all got them. We need to recognize those. Joseph was being blessed here, even though he's in prison. So, was the Lord with Jesus through his journey, even those tough days? Absolutely. Absolutely, he was with him. The Lord's with us too. So I see a connection between Joseph and Jesus. Now, Let me just share with you before we get into chapter 40. This reminds me of a story. When I went to preaching school, I was in Lubbock, Texas. I was there in, let's see, from the year 1998 to 2000. That's when I went to preaching school. I was a late bloomer, okay? Played the prodigal son for too many years. So it took me a while to, to get back with God. And while I was there, Richard Rogers was one of our instructors. I've talked a lot about Richard Rogers on this series. But he was a missionary in Laos, Burma, Thailand, Vietnam. And he was very well connected with this church that was in Thailand. I think it was in Thailand. No, it was in Laos. Here's this church. It's growing and growing. I mean, it's just getting bigger and bigger. And one day the authorities come in, because they're pretty much anti-Christian, and hauled all the men out of the jail, out of the church, and sent them to jail. All of them. So can you imagine this? Here's this church. Here's these wives, and they have nobody. Their kids, no dad. He's gone. So they put him in prison, and this prison is bad. Okay, it's bad. I remember the stories where the men had to lay just right, and they could never move, so they could all fit on the floor. They were just stacked in there, so close to each other. Very, very difficult. Okay, way to live. So there they are. And you go, okay, where's God at? What's going on here, God? But what happens? Well, they smuggle a Bible into the jail. Now remember, that's why they're in jail. Now, these guys all read English, but the guards didn't read English, and that's what the Bible was in, so they didn't know that was a Bible. So they're using this Bible, and they're converting people. They're baptizing people inside of this prison. The guards don't know what's going on because they don't know English, right? Then they end up taking one of these Christian men and put him in charge of the prison. Well, that sounds like Joseph's story, doesn't it? Right? While they're there, they have to make things so they can get money to eat. Okay? And so they would have to make things for the tourists. So the tourists would go by and they'd have to sell things from the prison to these tourists. They're making baskets. They're doing t-shirts. Guess what's on the t-shirts and on the baskets? Jesus this, Jesus that, verses here, verses there, all from the Bible. It's got God stuff all over it. But wait a minute, that's why they're in prison. Yeah, but the guards don't know it. And they're selling them to the tourists, right? That are coming from the United States or wherever, and they're getting all this Jesus stuff. It's great. It's just great. And then one day, after 2 years, the guards just decided, let them go back home. And they were reinstated with their family. Now, I know it's a hard story, but here's the bottom line. God was still with those people. And God still worked his plan through those people because those people were faithful. I like that story. He'll do the same with you. He'll do the same with you. All right, chapter 40. Now the cupbearer and the baker. So we're going to run into a couple of people. Here's Joseph. He's going to be in jail. He's in this prison, but he's going to run into two pretty prominent people that's going to be put in prison with him. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, this would be Pharaoh, offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with these two officials, stuck them in prison. I don't know what they did wrong, but he stuck them in there. The chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, this is Potiphar, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. Okay? Interesting. So here he is working with these two guys. Well, what happens? They're going to have a couple of dreams. Okay? All right. Well, Joseph has already been dealing with dreams. He's already had some dreams, told his brothers. Brothers got mad about it. Now they're going to have a couple of dreams. Chapter 40, verse 20. Now the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of the officials. Now, what happened? They both had dreams, right? And the cupbearer, his dream, Joseph interpreted it for him. God's going to give him the answer. Okay, he's going to be reinstated. But the chief baker, he had a dream, and he told him, "You're going to be killed." Not a good answer, is it? So here they are. They're both brought back out of prison in front of Pharaoh. Verse 21, he restored the chief cupbearer to his position, just like the dream that Joseph interpreted. So at once he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, cupbearer. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot about him. Just forgot about him. It's pretty sad. It's like, hey, don't forget about me. Right? When you get out of here, well, you know how that goes. So he forgot about him. Didn't Jesus have two thieves next to him on the cross? And what happened? Well, one went to paradise and one did not. Huh. Is there a connection? Possibly. Yeah, I think so. Okay. Let's keep going. Chapter 41. Joseph interprets a dream. So let's see what happens here. And Joseph is made second in command. So here he is, and Pharaoh has a dream, and it really bothers him. There's going to be, for 7 years, good cattle, and 7 years, bad cattle. Okay? And Joseph is going to interpret this dream for him. This cupbearer is going to say, "Hey, you had a bad dream. You want us to figure it out? Hey, there's a guy back in prison here, and he can tell you how to interpret this dream. He interpreted my dream, and it happened just like he said." So Pharaoh says, "All right, bring him in here. Let's hear what he's got to say." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." And I love what Joseph says. "I can do it." Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." There you go. Yeah, he can tell you. I'm just his servant. Okay. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all the people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So what does he do? He puts Joseph second in command. This is the greatest nation on the planet at this time. So Joseph is literally number 2 man in all the world. From slavery to number 2 man. He puts him in charge. Because the dream that he gave, he interpreted it. And so what happens? He's put in charge. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Now here's what I want you to see. Joseph was 17 years old when he was in that well, thrown in that well. And he was 30 years old when he was made number 2 man in all the world. That's 13 years from slavery to freedom. 13 years. But even during those 13 years, was God working in his life? Absolutely. Did God ever abandon him? No. No, he did not. He was there for him the whole time. And Joseph stayed faithful. And that's a key for us. When we're not understanding things and things are hard, stay faithful. Stay faithful. Jesus started his ministry at 30 years old. Don't know if there's a connection there or not, but it is interesting. Here is what they believe to be these huge hoppers where they stored this grain down in the ground. And that would be a lot of grain down there, wouldn't it? Yes. And it made Pharaoh rich because when the 7 years of famine came, he sold it to the world, and Pharaoh just got rich, all off of Joseph here because he interpreted the dreams. Chapters 42 and 43. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt. Joseph's brothers bring Benjamin. Then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother?" Okay, and so let me fill in the story. We don't have time to go through all the verses, okay, because that's how this curriculum is set up. So you got to go back here and read. So here's Jacob. There's a famine, okay? They're affected terribly. So he sends his sons down to Egypt to buy grain. Now they're in the famine. All right, things aren't going good. So they go down, they buy it, pay for it with silver, and then as they're traveling back, the silver is actually put in their bag. Okay? And they're like, wait a minute, it looks like they stole it. They stole the silver back. Okay. So then they run out there, they catch them, and they keep one of the brothers uh, for collateral. Okay? One of these brothers are going to be kept here. So he keeps this brother in prison. I forget which one it was. And he keeps them there so he'll make sure that these brothers come back because this is Joseph's brothers. He recognizes these guys. He sees them now. The very brothers that put him in prison, he has now seen them. He recognizes them. He's right in front of them, but they don't recognize him. So again, he sets this whole plan up, and this is the way that he can make sure, Joseph, that these boys are going to come back. Okay? So, he told him, when you come back, you better bring Benjamin with you. I want to see Benjamin because that's the closest brother that I have, right? It's from my same mother, right? I want to see him. So he lifted up his eyes, saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother whom you spoke of you to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Now his heart yearned for his brother, so Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. When he went into his chamber and wept there, then he washed his face, came out, and he restrained himself and said, "Serve the bread." So now the famine gets worse. The boys want to return to get more food. Jacob's like, "No, you've already got one of my sons down there in prison. You ain't losing another one." And he's telling them, "Look, I want that youngest son brought back. Okay, I want Benjamin brought back." And Jacob's like, "You ain't taking my youngest son, right? I've already lost Joseph. I ain't losing Benjamin too." But when it finally gets worse and worse, and there's just no food, Jacob finally gives in and lets Benjamin go. So here comes all the brothers back to Egypt to get more food. And then here's Joseph, right? He sees them again, and he has them all come in and says, "Hey, is this Benjamin?" "Yes, it is." "Okay, let's eat. Let's have a meal together." Okay? Joseph goes and weeps. This is hard on him. Okay? It's breaking his heart. I see him, my brother. I can't tell him it's me, right? So Genesis 44. Judah offers himself up for Benjamin. Now therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servant will bring down the gray hair of your servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go with his brothers. For how shall I go to my father if the boy is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father? Okay, so what's happening here is Joseph's like, okay, we're going to eat, but you guys can go back, take your grain back to your father, okay, which is Joseph's father, but I'm not letting go of Benjamin. He's staying here with me. And they're like, oh no, he's got to go back. If our father sees it that we don't return with that boy, it's going to be bad. So who steps in? Who's talking here in this story? Judah. Judah steps in and says, no, take me instead. Take my life as a ransom and let that boy go. It's interesting that Judah's sticking up like this. Jesus, like Judah, was willing to pay a ransom for us. He gave up his life. So now I see a connection between Judah and Jesus, right? Okay, let's see what happens. Chapter 45. Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those he stood by. He couldn't do it any longer, okay? All right, I just got to tell you guys who I am. And he cried out, make everyone go away from me. So get all the Egyptian people and my guards and all, just leave. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud. Can you imagine him crying like this? The passion of Joseph. And the Egyptians of the house of Pharaoh heard it. That's how loud this weeping was. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, come, please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery. Who you sold into slavery. And isn't that what Jesus did? He says, come near us. Even though he was sold for our sins. Come near us. He welcomes us back if we'll come back. This is a major moment right here. Major moment. So now let's look at the timeline. From 17 years old to 30 years old when he was reinstated or put in charge of Egypt. Then 7 years of famine. Now this is the second year. No, 7 years of good. Add that to 30. And then 2 years of famine. You're at 39 years. That is 22 years from the time that Joseph was enslaved, lost his family, until he will see all his family back together again. 22 years. Sometimes we got to wait on stuff, don't we? But God was with him, didn't he? He was with him. He blessed him. He took care of him. 22 years. It's an important story. Conclusion. Can you see that Joseph is a type of Jesus? It doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter where you're at. It doesn't matter what page that you're opening on this in this Bible. it's going to point to somebody. Jesus. Old Testament, New Testament. We've been watching the seed line, right? Coming all the way from Eve all the way down to Judah. But then even when we take a break and get away from Judah and we see this guy Joseph, boy, there's a lot of similarities and types and antitypes and analogies between Joseph and Jesus. And they're everywhere. Can you see where this Bible's pointing to? Can you see it? It's pointing to Jesus. To Jesus. If you ever get caught up in some group making promises, religious promises, all these religious groups out here, and they don't point solely to Jesus, you are in the wrong place. They want to point to man or some person or follow this guy or some great preacher. Make sure they point to Jesus. That's what these lessons are doing. They're going to point again and again and again to Jesus. And yet God uses all these flawed men with all of their flaws, Jacob, Joseph, Judah, Abraham, Adam and Eve, and yet using them to bring about his plan. And what does that tell you? That should tell you one thing, that God loves you despite of your flaws. Run to Jesus. Run to him. Find out what he wants you to do with you in your life and do everything he's told you to do so you can be in heaven someday. And if you got questions about that and you're wondering what I need to do, give me a call here at the Brown Street Church of Christ. I'd love to talk to you so we can lead you to Jesus through his word. We love you guys. I hope this is a faith builder for you. And keep reading that Bible. Keep digging. Hey, we're going to get into Moses next time on the next lesson. Hopefully we'll see you then. God bless you. Praying for you. Bye-bye.